There are nights that are supposed to be family celebrations, but instead turn into public executions of dignity. A son is humiliated by his own mother in front of hundreds of guests, reduced to something small so the room feels entitled to laugh. And the cruelest part isn't the laughter, it's realizing that family is using it as a weapon to erase his worth. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now, let's listen to him from the heart. I drove past the quiet rows of colonial houses, every lawn cut like a military haircut, every white fence blinding clean like it had just been repainted for a magazine shoot. It was late fall in Greenwich, Connecticut. The leaves had dropped. The streets were silent, and every detail screamed control. After years of base-life desert heat deployments and command briefings in cold steel rooms, this place should have felt like peace. But it didn't. It felt like walking into someone else's story, one that no longer had a role for me. I parked in front of the Ravelin House, a 3-story monument to legacy and reputation. I sat in the car for a while, engine off, listening. No music, no calls. Just the weight of what this weekend was about to be. My name is Maddox Ravelin. I'm 34. I've served 16 years in the Army, 8 of those embedded in operations most people will never hear about. I've been in enough foreign cities to know how to read a room without speaking. I don't like noise. I don't like being caught off guard. I always find the exits first. And I came back for one reason: Rory's wedding. My younger brother. The golden one. The heir. The one who got to stay. I didn't come to make a scene. I didn't come to fight. I came to be present, nod through the speeches, clap at the right times, and leave without starting a war. The front door still opened with the old key. But that's where the familiarity ended. No footsteps. No one yelling Maddox from upstairs. Not even a dog barked. Instead, the house greeted me with silence and the layered scent of lemon-polished bergamot oil diffused through vents and something I could never quite name, but I knew it well. Money. Money in the form of restraint, of curated perfection. In the grand entryway, the first thing I looked for without thinking was the framed photo of me in dress blues on graduation day from West Point. It used to hang just above the curved staircase. What was there now? A painting. Oil on canvas. My mother, Blythe Ravelin, and Rory Midlaff at some black tie gala. It was elegant. It was posed. And it was unmistakably a replacement. I stepped closer. The frame size was identical. The lighting angles matched. They hadn't just redecorated. They'd erased me. Behind me, heels clicked against the marble. Blythe appeared trailing a wedding planner with an iPad and a Bluetooth headset. She looked me over the way you'd assess a surprise delivery, curious, slightly annoyed. "Maddox," she said. "Not sweetheart, not darling. Just my name flat as a label. You'll be in the guest room on the 2nd floor, the one near the linen closet. There are extra towels inside. Please try not to disrupt the final walkthroughs. We're rehearsing table placements later this evening." I nodded once. She didn't ask how the drive was. She didn't ask how I'd been. To the planner, she said, "Let's head back to the sunroom. We'll review the floral setups there." I was dismissed before I even stepped out of my boots. That was the thing with Blythe. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She didn't need to. Her real talent was subtle disinheritance. She'd mastered the art of removing you from the center of the story while making it look like you never belonged there in the first place. But I caught it slipped into her instructions like a stray pinprick. "After the wedding, we'll finalize the family property paperwork," she'd said. Then something about moving assets into place. It wasn't the words. It was the ease with which she said them. As if those decisions were already set. As if my name had already been crossed out on some legal document I hadn't seen. I stood there for a while after she disappeared. Marble under my boots, oil paint smiling down from the wall. All I'd wanted was to come home, play the role of the quiet older brother, make it through the weekend, and leave before the family politics pulled me under. But when someone goes through the effort to take down your portrait, they're usually planning to erase a lot more than your face. Night fell, and the house transformed. The chandeliers glowed warm. Valet-parked luxury cars lined the driveway. The kitchen buzzed like a small hotel staff. It wasn't just a rehearsal dinner, it was a performance. Greenwich people know how to throw elegant chaos. The noise was refined laughs with restrained whispers about hedge funds, compliments about school acceptances, and Tuscan renovations. Every wine glass chimed politely. Every guest looked like they belonged to a catalog. I didn't. I knew it. And worse, so did everyone else. I stuck to the perimeter of the party, a habit I'd picked up in too many foreign briefings and diplomatic rooms. If the center of the room doesn't want you, you stay at the edges, and you listen. That's when it started. A woman in a tailored emerald dress leaned in and asked, "And what do you do, Maddox?" Before I could answer, my mother was suddenly there. Her hand on the woman's elbow, her voice a soft trill. "Oh, Maddox, he does some sort of administrative work with the government. Desk stuff, nothing exciting." She laughed, the kind of laugh designed to sound effortless, the kind that closes a conversation before it can open. I saw the shift happen, the guest's interest turning into polite dismissal. I could practically hear her reassessing me, not military, not remarkable, not useful to this room. But Blythe wasn't done. She pulled something from a cabinet, a stiff white apron, folded sharp, the kind you'd find at a budget catering event. She handed it to me, smiling like this was a favor. "You don't know many people here, so why not help with the hors d'oeuvres you're used to serving after all?" Then, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, she added, "He's just a low-rank grunt." The silence that followed lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it was filled by a wave of tight, sharp laughter. Controlled, coordinated, and cruel. I looked at Rory. He'd heard it. He was mid-conversation with someone who looked like a senator or a major donor. He met my eyes, and then he turned away like nothing had happened. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Blythe. Rory wasn't a bystander. He was in on it. His silence wasn't neutral, it was strategic. I took the apron, walked toward the kitchen without a word. The door swung shut behind me and the air changed. Cold lights, stainless steel. The laughter muffled behind thick walls. I unfolded the apron, looked at it for a beat, then folded it back perfectly and dropped it into the trash can. That was my answer. No yelling, no drama, just rejection of the role they had scripted for me. But that's not the end. As I stood there, one of the kitchen staff whispered to another near the sink, "Did you put the documents where she said, 'for tomorrow's dinner'?" "Yeah," the other replied, locked in the side drawer of the study. She said, "Don't mention anything until after the cake." I didn't know what papers they were talking about, but I knew that Blythe didn't bring paperwork to a wedding for no reason. That night, I lay awake in the room they'd given me next to the supply closet, the ceiling low, the mattress stiff. It smelled like cedar and dust and disuse. I wasn't awake because I was humiliated. That wasn't new. I'd lived through far worse. I was awake because I knew something was moving behind the scenes. And this time, I wasn't just a forgotten son. I was a threat. I left Greenwich before the sun came up. The house was still asleep when I slipped out the driveway, empty, the windows dark. The road ahead was wrapped in fog so thin it looked like the world had been erased and redrawn in pencil. Streetlights blurred into pale halos. For once, the silence didn't feel hostile. It felt neutral, honest. I drove north without music, without checking my phone. I knew exactly where I was going. Kensico Cemetery sat quietly beyond the last stretch of town, a wide-open field of headstones laid out with military precision. When I stepped out of the car, the cold bit through my jacket. The air smelled like damp earth and fallen leaves. Morning hadn't arrived yet, but it was close. You could feel it waiting. Here, silence wasn't something used to punish or control. It was something earned. I walked until I found his name. Daniel Ravelin, Colonel, United States Army. The stone was cool and smooth beneath my fingers. Too clean, too carefully kept. I reached into my coat pocket and wrapped my hand around the challenge coin I'd carried without thinking since leaving the house. It was heavy-worn, smooth around the edges, stamped with an insignia that meant something only to people who'd stood in the same kind of place as I had. I knelt and placed it gently at the base of the headstone. "Hey, Dad," I said quietly. There were things I could never say in Blythe's house, things that didn't survive in rooms where every word was weighed for appearance. Here I didn't have to measure myself. I remembered a night from when I was a kid sitting on the back porch with him. The house lights were off behind us. He'd pointed up at the sky, naming stars I couldn't see at first. "Your mother likes the bright ones," he'd said. "The kind everyone notices right away." Then he traced a faint line with his finger, barely visible unless you were looking for it. "But soldiers," he said, "they follow the dim stars. The ones that don't show off. The ones that still guide you when everything else disappears." He'd smiled at me then, not like I was lacking, but like I was trusted. "Be a dim star, Maddox," he'd said. "Quiet, constant. You'll always know where you're going." At the time, I thought it was just a metaphor, a lesson about humility. Kneeling there now, something else caught my eye. The grass around the stone was disturbed, not badly, subtly, as if someone had been there recently. There were clean streaks on the granite wiped down with care. It wasn't Blythe. She hated places like this. There was nothing to display here, no audience, no return on investment. So who had come, Rory unlikely? Or someone else? I stood slowly, my knees stiff from the cold. As I did, another memory surfaced, one I'd pushed aside for years because I didn't know what to do with it. A week before he died, my father had stood in the study looking out the window at the house. He'd said almost to himself, "That place doesn't belong to the shine. It belongs to the truth." I'd assumed he meant values, character, the usual things people say when they're sick and reflective. Now, standing in front of his grave, I wondered if he'd meant something far more specific. Legal truths had a way of hiding behind polite language, and Blythe's sudden urgency about paperwork, about assets, about timing, it didn't feel random anymore. It felt defensive, like someone afraid I might remember something I was never supposed to question. When I turned back toward the car, the sky was finally beginning to lighten. The fog thinned. The world came back into focus. But inside me, everything sharpened. That special dinner wasn't a gesture of reconciliation. It wasn't about family. It was a trap. And this time, I wouldn't walk into it empty-handed. I didn't go back to Greenwich. Instead, I drove south into Manhattan and parked near a busy block, just waking up to the day. I chose a coffee shop that stayed loud enough to disappear in, but quiet enough to think. People tapped at laptops. Baristas shouted orders. No one cared who I was. I opened my encrypted laptop and let routine take over. Inbox, calendar, briefings. I needed to anchor myself in systems that made sense, not family dynamics that shifted with mood and manipulation. I had one rule: no reaction without information. That was when the email arrived. Subject line: meeting. Sender: Captain Sable Hartwin, Rory's fiancé. No greeting, no explanation, just a time and location near Midtown. I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. The message wasn't written like an invitation. It read like coordinates. That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't reaching out as a bride. She was reaching out as someone who understood reconnaissance. When I arrived, she was already there. Civilian clothes, neutral colors. But her posture gave her away. Back to the wall. Clear view of the door. Coffee untouched. I sat across from her and waited. She spoke first. "I know what your mother is doing," she said calmly. "And I'm not part of it." She didn't soften the words. She didn't apologize for them. "She's preparing documents," Sable continued. "Not for the wedding, for property." That confirmed it. Then she said something that made me look at her differently. "I ran a background check on you months ago. After Rory started misrepresenting things." She met my eyes. "I know you're not administrative staff, and I know she's trying to make you look harmless." Sable took a breath before continuing. "I served in a unit that was extracted from a bad situation in eastern Afghanistan. Command signature was yours. You probably don't remember my name. She named the operation. The valley. The weather conditions. I remembered the report, not the faces. That day, she said quietly, is the reason I'm sitting here. I understood then. This wasn't curiosity. This was debt. Sable folded her hands. I won't marry into a family that humiliates a soldier and steals from him. If that's what this wedding is built on, it doesn't happen. There it was. Pressure Blythe hadn't anticipated. Then Sable leaned closer. She's already laying groundwork. Media people. Social circles. A story about you, unstable, disruptive. If you embarrass her, she plans to flip it on you. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. A name. An address. Dr. Priya Cade, she said. She understands how powerful people rewrite truth. When I left the coffee shop, I knew two things for certain. The dinner wasn't about conversation, and if I walked into it alone, I wouldn't walk out clean. The address Sable gave me was quiet midtown east of 6th, tucked between a private investment firm and a Korean skincare boutique. Nothing about it stood out. No flashy sign. Frosted glass. A single keypad at the door. Inside, I was buzzed in without a word. What I expected to find was a therapist's office. What I walked into looked more like the forward operating center from my last deployment. A war room. Dry erase boards lined the walls with diagrams and names written in different colored ink. There were monitors quietly displaying news tickers, security feeds, and legal databases. Timelines stretched across corkboards, power maps, influence charts. A woman looked up from a laptop and stood tall, composed in her late 40s with sharp eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. "Call me Priya," she said. "You're not crazy. You're under attack." She didn't waste time with comfort. She laid it out clearly. What was happening to me wasn't about family friction or unresolved grief or personal miscommunication. It was a deliberate campaign, strategic erasure, and narrative rewriting designed to isolate me, strip me of public legitimacy, and quietly remove me from anything tied to my father's name. "She's rewriting history," Priya said. "Not just for dinner guests, for courts, for press, for future trustees." I didn't say anything. I just nodded because I already knew she was right. I had known it in my gut since I left that ballroom. "We don't fight that kind of war with feelings," Priya continued. "We fight it with records." She slid 2 items across the table, a compact digital recorder and an encrypted USB drive. "From now on," she said, "every private conversation is evidence. No data, no victory." I agreed, no hesitation. The truth was no longer enough unless I could prove it and prevent it from being buried. Sable arrived 10 minutes later. She brought structure. We gathered around the table. I gave them the behavioral pattern, my mother's manipulation style, the emotional traps, her timing with shame. I walked them through the way she dressed cruelty up in concern, how she'd twist a moment and later claim it never happened. Sable provided tactical access, wedding timelines, microphone handoffs when the slideshow would play. She knew who was giving speeches, who'd be seated near whom. She had eyes on the inner circle. Priya mapped the enemy network. A constellation of names, donors, charity board members, a well-known lifestyle blogger, the family attorney, 3 mid-tier influencers. All of them slated to attend the wedding. All of them with public reach or quiet influence. My mother wasn't planning a celebration. She was curating a narrative event. Priya raised one question that shifted everything. "Has Rory ever mentioned a trust? Anything about your father's estate?" I hesitated. He said Mom was still handling stuff. That she was the one keeping the house running. That's code, Priya said. He may have signed something without realizing it. Consent, proxy, endorsement. If he's a legal participant in any asset transfer, that makes him a tool, not just a bystander. I sat back. The weight of it settled on me, not just betrayal, but complicity by negligence, or worse, indifference. And your father's real legacy, she continued, might not be in the house at all. She outlined a possibility, a timed trust, a transfer clause, something that would be triggered by a major life event like Rory's wedding. It wasn't just the social optics. The wedding could be the legal switch. That's why my mother was rushing. Why she needed me to sign something fast and quietly. It was a deadline, not a gesture. Then Priya made her next move. She started assigning names. This person gets the audio. This one the legal analysis. This reporter gets the timeline of events. This one's on standby in case we need a story planted from our side. It wasn't about making a scene. It was about anchoring the truth in too many places to bury. Sable leaned in again. She's mentioned an old photo of you. She said it might come in handy if you made trouble. That landed hard. I knew the photo's sweaty, exhausted moments after pulling out of a 17-hour siege in Kandahar. My eyes looked hollow. The lighting made my skin look gray. Here's the plan, Priya said. You're going to walk into that dinner. You're going to let her lay it out. You will not interrupt. You will not show your hand. Let her speak. I nodded. And then, for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just absorbing blows in that family. I was preparing my own strike. The room shimmered with quiet wealth. Soft jazz floated under the murmur of Manhattan's elite. Per se wasn't just expensive. It was curated restraint luxury that knew how to whisper. My mother had reserved a private alcove overlooking Central Park. The kind of table where hedge fund managers made mergers and senators whispered deals. Everything about it was intentional, the lighting, the acoustics, the proximity to other tables that might eavesdrop without appearing to. She smiled when I arrived. So did Rory. They looked polished, coordinated, rehearsed. Darling, my mother beamed. I'm so glad you made time. The small talk was sugar-drenched, family pride, wedding stress, gratitude for my service. She even complimented my jacket, and I played along. I nodded. I smiled. I responded warmly, because I knew the script needed to play out uninterrupted. It came after dessert. Right as the server cleared the plates and the espresso arrived, she reached into her handbag. Out came a slim, cream-colored folder. She placed it gently on the table and slid it across the linen. No pressure, she said lightly. Just something to sign to keep things streamlined. Asset consolidation. For Rory's stability after the wedding. I opened it. The legal jargon was dense but clear enough for anyone trained to read threat matrices. Phrases leapt off the page: irrevocable waiver, relinquishment of claim, forfeiture of future interest. This wasn't streamlining. It was erasure. I closed the folder slowly. I'll have my attorney look it over, I said. Her expression didn't flinch at first, but the temperature changed. Her voice dipped sharper. Family doesn't need lawyers. Her hand flattened against the folder. You don't trust your own mother? I didn't move. I said evenly, I'll respond once legal counsel has reviewed it. And I stood up. I dropped 100 on the table. Looked at Rory. His eyes were empty. Then I walked out. No argument, no dramatics, no performance for the onlookers she'd surely counted on. I didn't give her the scene she wanted. That night I went home and got to work. Every page was photographed, documented, and uploaded to Priya's secure drive. The audio recording backed up 3 ways. Everything was time-stamped. Priya called me within the hour. Her legal analyst confirmed the folder was a full forfeiture document constructed by a specialist in high-net-worth family disputes. If I'd signed, my rights would have been near impossible to reclaim. But the night wasn't over. Sable texted me a link. A lifestyle blog that catered to the New York elite had just posted a story. No author name, just exclusive insight. The headline hit like a cold slap. Estranged son returns. Unstable veteran threatens family's joy. There was a photo. Me post-operation looking hollow-eyed and unshaven, cropped to exaggerate the wildness. The story didn't quote sources, but it mirrored my mother's voice: perfectly vague accusations, veiled concerns, a tone of wounded nobility. It clicked. She didn't just want me out, she wanted me illegitimate. Because in a world where people see you as unstable, every claim you make becomes delusion. Every accusation becomes paranoia. That's how she wins, by making my truth sound like madness. I stared at the screen. One sentence chilled me. Sources fear the son may attempt to disrupt the wedding. Priya called again, voice clipped. She's laying groundwork. That line lets them eject you with security or fabricate a psychiatric incident. I didn't reply right away. Then I said, initiate everything. All of it. Because I wasn't enduring anymore. I was deploying. And this time I had the files, the words, the proof. She gave me everything I needed. And she did it on record. I didn't sleep the night after per se. Not because I was upset. Not because I was angry. I didn't sleep because my mind was operating like it used to before a high-level op tracking variables, simulating outcomes, memorizing faces, and fallback routes. The wedding wasn't a celebration anymore. It was a public execution. My name, my record, my identity. All up for reshaping under the soft lights of the Plaza Ballroom. And this time, my mother wasn't just using silence. She was staging a performance. Priya and I met the next morning in her midtown office, which now looked more like a command center than a law firm. On the whiteboard, she'd mapped out every moving part, speaker lineups, cue timings, audio feeds, likely points of interception. Sable joined remotely. She'd sent over the internal event run sheet from the wedding planner. It included things that most guests wouldn't even think about, like which microphones would be hot when the toasts began or who had permissions to control the slide deck. There were asterisks next to names. Mother of the groom, priority access to mic. Family remarks, pre-cleared only. And then in small handwritten script at the bottom, if family conflict arises, notify ballroom security immediately. That was the plan. My mother wasn't just waiting for me to speak out, she was waiting to label me a threat the moment I did. So we made a counterplan. I would not take the bait. I would not speak out of turn. I would not give her the headline. Instead, we would change the rules of engagement. If the mic was the weapon, we'd place it in the hands of someone she didn't control. And if the room was the stage, then I needed to step onto it with something she couldn't smear proof. I pulled my dress uniform out of its garment bag later that night. The wool still held the shape of my shoulders even after years untouched. I aligned the ribbons precisely, cleaned the insignia until they reflected the ceiling light. The silver eagles gleamed like sentinels. I didn't wear it to show rank. I wore it because the story I needed to tell could only be told in a language my mother couldn't twist. On the morning of the wedding, Sable arranged my entrance. Not through the main door where security had likely been told to watch for disruptions, but through a side corridor reserved for hotel staff and VIPs. I wore my uniform. I said nothing. I handed over my name. They let me in. When I walked into the grand ballroom, the music didn't stop, but the air did shift, like someone had opened a window in the middle of a staged scene. Eyes followed me, not all, but enough. I didn't walk to the front. I didn't move toward the family pew. I sat down in the very last row, upright, silent. A living contradiction to whatever whisper campaign had preceded me. From where I sat, I could see my mother stand and turn. She saw me. Her smile calcified. And then she did what she always did, gathered a cluster of guests around her like a shield, leaned in with just enough performance to let them know she had a story to share. And they listened. Of course they did. She'd already begun writing the ending. She thought I was the final obstacle to her narrative. But I wasn't her obstacle, I was her mirror. From across the room, Rory glanced toward me. It was brief, but it was there. He didn't look triumphant. He looked shaken. Like maybe for the first time he realized what it meant to be seen through her eyes, and what it cost. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to feel the weight of being her son. At the front of the room, the podium was being prepared. The family remarks were next. Priya had positioned everything perfectly, the dossier ready to launch the confirmation from General Whitaker Dane, time-stamped and embedded in the projection deck, the timeline of smear pieces prepared to circulate. But timing was everything. If we launched too early, she'd spin. If we waited too long, she'd claim the mic and the framing. We waited. I watched. And then I heard her voice, low, direct, speaking to someone beside her. If he so much as opens his mouth, she said, I'll show them who he really is. She wasn't afraid of a lie being exposed. She was afraid of the truth arriving too early. I didn't move. I let her rise. Let her walk up to the mic like she owned the room. And for a second, maybe she did. But not for long. The lights in the Plaza Ballroom adjusted slightly as the family speeches began. just enough to cast a glow on the podium without overwhelming the chandeliers. My mother took the stage like it belonged to her. Of course she did. She spoke of legacy, of sacrifice, of building something meaningful. Her words were measured, her tone perfectly modulated, warm enough to sound maternal, detached enough to sound regal. She hadn't mentioned my name yet. She didn't need to. Everyone knew what was coming. They just didn't know when. And then it landed. She turned slightly, her gaze drifting toward the back of the room, and with a casual cruelty she said into the mic, "Of course, not everyone understands what it means to serve the family. Some choose their own path. Our own version of a low-rank grunt." Polite laughter followed, measured, synchronized. It was the kind of laughter you hear at fundraisers and gallery openings, more about signaling allegiance than amusement. They weren't laughing at a joke. They were laughing because they thought it was safe. And then it wasn't. Rory stood up. He didn't hesitate. He didn't check with anyone. He walked to the edge of the platform and reached for the mic. My mother froze mid-sentence, hand slightly extended like she might pull it back, but Rory's grip was already on the mic stand. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. And in one clean motion, shoulders squared, spine straight, he raised his hand in a military salute. "To Major General Zev Ravelin," he said. Clear, slow, deliberate. The room stopped breathing. I didn't stand. I didn't move. I watched my mother's body language collapse in real time. Her jaw slack, her eyes wide, her posture sagging. She looked like someone whose lines had been stolen from her just before curtain call. Rory kept speaking. He acknowledged my rank, my record, that I had commanded units in live operations that saved lives, including Sable's. He said he'd stayed silent too long, that it was easier to accept the stories she fed him than to face the cost of repeating them. And then the screen behind him came to life. No more monogram, no more wedding slideshow. It was an after-action report, official high-resolution scans. My name, my rank, my commendations. Photos followed. Me in uniform, me receiving commendations, me in the field. Then a video. General Whitaker Dane, crisp and composed, speaking to camera. "This is to confirm Major General Zev Ravelin's active record of service, his field leadership during Operation Midnight Lance, and his receipt of the Distinguished Service Cross." You could hear the phones buzzing in waves. It was Priya. She'd released the dossier to key media contacts in the room. The audio from Per Se, the paper trail of the blog post's origin, the waiver, the timeline, the digital fingerprints leading back to my mother's team. She couldn't claim it was exaggerated. She couldn't say I planted it. It was in their hands now. Not mine. Not hers. She screamed, "Stop this." She moved toward the stage, but no one cleared a path. Not this time. The applause started small, a single table, then another, until it became a standing ovation, not for spectacle but for justice. The human instinct to honor the truth when it finally cuts through the noise. I didn't walk to the front. I didn't raise my hand. I stayed seated. Because I wasn't there to reclaim a spotlight. I was there to reclaim a story. And I had. 3 days later, my attorney sent a letter to my mother. It was concise, formal, and legally unshakable. I was the rightful heir to my father's estate. I didn't evict her. I didn't humiliate her publicly, but I did serve her a rental agreement with terms set at full market rate. Every dollar from that rent would go into a scholarship fund, named after my father, designated for the children of wounded or fallen service members. She could still live in the house she'd weaponized, but she'd do it knowing it now served a purpose she never believed in. And I didn't need her permission to know who I was. Inheritance isn't about property. It's about what you protect when no one's clapping. It's about standing still while the room spins and being the only one not dizzy. West Point reached out last week. They asked me to keynote this spring, and yesterday a video arrived in my inbox. A young woman, daughter of a fallen airman, saying thank you. Her tuition now fully covered. I watched it alone, then closed my laptop. Some stars shine, others guide. I was never meant to sparkle. I was meant to endure. What stayed with me most wasn't the applause or the vindication, or even the stunned silence when the truth was finally undeniable. It was the moment after. The moment when I realized I didn't need revenge. I didn't need them to say sorry. I didn't need my mother to change or the past to rewrite itself. Because some battles aren't about winning, they're about reclaiming your name, your ground, and your peace. The most dangerous lie isn't the one others tell about you. It's the one you start to believe when they say it long enough. For years I kept quiet, thinking that silence was strength, that walking away made me the bigger person. But sometimes silence gives power to the wrong people. Sometimes being quiet lets injustice grow roots. And when that happens, speaking up isn't ego. It's duty. What I learned, what I want to pass on is this. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight dirty to win with honor. And you don't have to let your story be told by the very people who tried to erase you. Tell your story in your own way. Use facts, not fire. Truth, not theatrics. Let your values, not your anger, lead the way. That's what makes the truth undeniable. That's what gives it weight. And if the people you love become the ones who wound you most, don't let that turn you into them. Let it turn you into someone better. Someone who turns harm into healing and legacy, into something lasting. My father once told me rank fades. Integrity doesn't. Now I understand what he meant. This story wasn't about proving I was right. It was about proving that truth handled with quiet conviction still has the power to change a room and maybe even the world. Sometimes the deepest shift doesn't come from a big confrontation, it comes from that quiet moment after when the dust settles, and we finally see ourselves without all the noise. Tonight's story wasn't just about a uniform, a microphone, or even a mother's judgment. It was about the long journey one man took to reclaim his voice in a room that once tried to drown him out. And maybe in some way we've all known what it feels like to be misunderstood, mislabeled, or dismissed by the very people we long to be seen by. We carry so much in silence. But healing doesn't always mean confrontation. It can also mean standing tall, choosing what kind of person we want to be when no one claps and walking away without needing anyone else to rewrite the ending for us. The truth is, not every story gets a clean resolution. But even in the mess, there's beauty when we choose grace over bitterness and clarity over chaos. If something in this story resonated with you or reminded you of a chapter from your own life and you feel like sharing, we're here. Just a few words in the comments might help someone else feel a little less alone. And if you'd like to stay close to this circle of quiet stories where truth finds its way through the noise, feel free to subscribe. We'll be right here next time. Same place, same voice. Until then, take care of what's true in you.